What happens when you tax billionaires at 90%? You know, Secession, the TV show, is over. By the way, if you want to discuss Secession, Louise and I watched the whole series, thought it was absolutely brilliant. Anyhow, Secession is over, but the spoiled, entitled billionaire man-children still, you know, very much with us, running social media companies, owning newspapers and television networks, funding politicians and judges, you know, who then keep their taxes low and the regulations minimal. America's billionaires pay an average income tax rate of 3.1%. Are you paying 3.1%? I'm willing to bet it's not the case, unless you happen to be a billionaire or, you know, worth $500, $600, $700 million. What has that brought us? That has made America the most unequal society in the developed world. Nobody's even close. And the last time we had such severe poverty, and we have a homelessness epidemic here in America. I mean, it's not just people are poor, people are literally sleeping on streets. We not only have massive poverty in the United States, we also have insane wealth. 3 men in the United States own more wealth than the bottom half of America, of all Americans, 160 million Americans. 3 men own more wealth than all of them. We read about roving gangs doing smash and grabs in Nordstrom and Home Depot. You got in red states, our schools are falling apart because they're redirecting money to vouchers to pay for all-white Christian academies. Gun violence is plaguing our nation, particularly in red states, real high homicide rates in red states. Homelessness is stalking city dwellers at every turn. You know, the last time we saw such inequality was during the Republican Great Depression and the so-called Roaring Twenties that preceded them. Now, the Roaring Twenties were only roaring for the billionaires. Poverty actually increased in America during the 1920s at the bottom half of the wage scale. But billionaires did really well in the 1920s because when Warren Harding came into office in 1921, the top tax rate was 91%. He dropped it down to 25%. And so for, you know, the next decade, billionaires are making out like bandits. Many would argue they were bandits. And, you know, the rest of America got screwed. And then Franklin Roosevelt came along in 1936, and he said, this will not stand. We're not going to do this. We're going to do something about this. In fact, we're going to raise taxes. I've got some audio here from the 360, Sean. This is Franklin Roosevelt talking about taxes.
Taxes, after all, are the dues that we pay for the privilege of membership in an organized society. And as society becomes more civilized, government, national and state and local, is called on to assume more obligations to its citizens. The privileges of membership in a civilized society have vastly increased in modern times. But I am afraid we have many who still do not recognize their advantages and want to avoid paying their dues.
There you go. And you know, he went on. There was one particular comment. It's in my article. I don't have the audio in the article, but here's the audio. This is Franklin Roosevelt talking about how his rich friends, keep in mind, Franklin Roosevelt was born very, very rich. His rich friends are a little concerned about his 90% top income tax rate.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
So, anyhow, what happened when FDR raised the tax rate to 91%, to 90% on the billionaires of his day, you know, in today's dollars? Well, what happened was we saw the American middle class go from about 20% of Americans to over 2/3 of Americans by 1981 when Reagan came into office. We saw poverty collapse. We saw old age poverty pretty much go away because of Social Security that he got us in 1935. We saw union membership grow to the point where 2/3 of Americans, when Reagan came into office, had the equivalent of a good union job, which is why 2/3 of us were in the middle class. And life expectancy in the United States hit a peak that had never been seen in the history of the world. Now, what has happened in the 42 years since then, since Ronald Reagan instituted neoliberalism, Reaganomics? You know, I wrote a whole book about this, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, how Reaganomics gutted America. It's my most recent book in the Hidden History series. And what happened was life expectancy crashed in the United States, only in the United States, not in Europe, not in any of the other developed countries, but just in the United States, life expectancy crashed, and as did wages. The middle class has gone from 2/3 of us to 45% of us, and now it takes 2 jobs to maintain a middle class lifestyle instead of just the one you could do when Jimmy Carter was president, you know, before Reagan. FDR had it right, and we need to do this again. We need to raise the top income tax rate bracket, just the bracket. It will only be paid by people making over $1 million or over $10 million or over $50 million or wherever they want to set it. When FDR set the top bracket, the top 90% bracket, he set that at above $50,000. Now, $50,000 back in 1932 was the equivalent of $1,100,000 today in annual income. So, yeah, 90% income tax on income over $1.1 million. That's what he did. And what did it do? It rescued America. It built the American middle class. It got us out of the Great Depression. It expanded and extended our lifespans. It made Americans healthier. It stabilized us. We had 40, 50 years of peace and prosperity like we had never seen before, and neither had the world. It worked. Now, Republicans are going to get all hysterical if you talk about raising the top income tax bracket to 90% like it was from literally, I mean, it was during World War I and then starting in the 1930s, went back up to 90% and it stayed there. I mean, LBJ dropped it down to 74% in 1967. But, you know, what he did when he dropped it was he closed so many loopholes that it actually increased the actual income tax that was being paid by billionaires. Reagan dropped it down to 27%, and it's been in the 20s and 30s ever since then, and that's why your average billionaire now is paying 3.1% in income taxes. We need to do something about this. Let's make America great again, eh? What say you? We'll be right back. Stay tuned.